Hi folks, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of which is going on all over the Western world at the moment, and only the white countries, but the declaration of and the determination of what constitutes a hate group. Now, there's some problems with this because there's no definition of hate. Or if there is an attempted definition, it's so vague that anyone spitting on the sidewalk could be accused of it. But what's noticeable here is that all these so-called hate group attempts at legislation by Western parliaments or congresses, whether at the state level or the federal level, it looks pretty much like it was all written by the same person. So we can see quite clearly that the ideology driving this is commonly shared, whether it's in the legislature of a US state or an Australian state, or federal legislation in Australia or Britain or Canada or New Zealand or whatever like that, all across the white Western world, Western Europe. We're seeing the same thing, and again, it's written. It looks like it's written by the same person. And so ideologically, the controlling factors, the determining factors, the central factors that are included in this attitude, sentiment, and ultimately the legislation is very much a shared and commonly shared, and I would argue deeply entrenched ideology. They're all driven by the same thing. Now, you would think that the legislation would differ depending on circumstances of the country and the conditions. It would be directly addressing issues that are germane to that particular jurisdiction. For example, there are some countries where, say, there's hardly any Islamic groups, or there's very few Jews, or there's a lot of Jews, or a lot of Islamic people, or whatever marginalized group that supposedly needs to be protected against supposed or alleged, mostly invented or imagined hate. But nonetheless, even though the circumstance conditions differ widely across the countries, the ideology remains rigidly the same, and thus you get the same type of documents and legislation, and the framing of the legislation, even the working papers to justify the legislation on so-called hate. That again, you'd say it was written by the same person. Now, the argument, the phrasing, the logic that's applied doesn't appear to be. It's an adult writing it. I would think it was an intern or maybe someone still doing gender studies or something like that at college. It's a female, definitely female, but a young person writing it. There's no question it's female, but it seems like a young person. But it could be, I've met sort of sociology and gender studies women who are in their 40s, 50s, who still act, think, and behave and talk and structure their sentences as if they are 19 years old and first year students. But anyway, this is now, what are the problems with it? Now, in basic Western law, you had to commit a crime, and it had to be proven in a court of law. You committed the crime, and then penalties were issued. It could be fines or imprisonment or whatever. But the penalties, the laws that you need to break, were clearly codified, and the burden of proof, at least in sort of the British system, the burden of proof rested with the state. Now, say in what's generically referred to in the United States as Napoleonic law, the state, you have to prove your innocence, but the state has a much bigger obligation to determine the likelihood of your guilt. So that kind of balances out there. I mean, you could argue about the merits of each one, but that kind of balances out there. But it's new, or relatively new, in the West, where the accused has to carry the entire burden of proof for determining their innocence, or proving their innocence, or proving they're not guilty. Now, that's a huge change. We might think, well, that's only just, hey, that's not really that much, is it? But it is. It's a fucking big deal, and we need to realize that's the path that the Western legal system, the Western jurisprudence that emanates from British law and common law, which extracts a lot of its bits from the canon law era, but nonetheless, and this is a big deal, the reversing of the burden of proof, and to do it arbitrarily, to say, okay, we're going to accuse you of being a member of a hate group, and we don't have to prove it at all, but you have to prove that you're not a member of a hate group or you didn't do something hateful. That places the accused in effectively an impossible position, because they're being denied basic due legal process in there. So when I look at the legislation or proposed legislation ping-ponging around the Western world, and Australia is no different, it explicitly, now I wait for this, I just want this to sink in, the enormity of this. It explicitly states that the accused of being a member of a hate group or having committed an act of hate, which itself doesn't have a proper definition, you are denied, the state has no obligation, the state prosecuting it has no obligation to give you or extend to you due legal process. So let's just look at this. They can arbitrarily say you're a member of a hate group, and they can do so without evidence, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. In addition to that, they can say, well, you're not entitled to due legal process. Once we've said you're a member of a hate group, you're not entitled to due legal process. And then, because they got to drag you into court before they can throw you into prison, then the burden of proof to prove that you're not a member of a hate group or didn't do something hateful, the entire burden of proof rests with you. So the state only has to allege it. That's it, alleged. They don't need the evidence. I mean, I'm sure they're going with something. Billy Bob said that Jimmy Jack did this. So, I'm sure they're going with something. But the burden of proof or level of proof they require is just an allegation. That's enough. Doesn't have to be proven. It can even be manifestly untrue, but you're not entitled to due legal process. Now, this is something that's in the, and I saw one of the documents. I'm just going to do this. The accused of the state is not required, the prosecutors, meaning the state, is not required to observe, I'm paraphrasing, due legal process or any procedural fairness. Let that fucking sink in. The accused is not entitled to legal procedural fairness. Holy fuck! How did we get to this place? And this is what's going on. Now, this is of course the only species, racial species in the West that's not protected, as in, is not supposedly a marginalized group, straight white male Christians, and to a lesser extent women. But women fall under the oppressed female marginalized group, so that to some extent white Christian women get some sort of minor protection there, but only if they're in legal contest with straight white men, because then they have the lower social power sort of totem pole thing. But if white Christian women are in contest with Jewish or I don't know, Islamic or black or lesbian or LGBTQ, that sort of thing, then the pendulum swings back again. The straight white woman is then the Nazi. So this is how this legislation is being framed. Now, politicians are voting for this. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's a good one. What will this accomplish and achieve other than debasing the very bedrock of jurisprudence? And when we look at Western jurisprudence, it grew up in tandem, it developed organically in tandem with political representation, the expanding of the franchise, all this sort of thing, writs of habeas corpus. The government can't throw people in prison and just keep them there while they think about it, because that's, the process is the punishment type angle. So writs of habeas corpus and that sort of thing. Now, this is all thrown out the window now. If we say, and this is just the politician, the political class, if we say, who are controlled by the globalists, we say you're a member of a hate group, which we don't have to define, and you've committed an act of hate, which we don't have to define. All we need to do is assert it, and then we can send the police, the state, the goons around, with guns to arrest you, drag you off, put you in handcuffs, perp walk you for the cameras. We got another Nazi, swastika. Blah, blah, blah. Well, perp walk you into the fucking prison. You're not entitled to, written into the legislation, by the way, you're not entitled to procedural fairness. Who even thought that up? The accused is not entitled to procedural fairness. What fucking moron put that in there? I mean, that's insane. That's it. So that the social contract that we, the Western citizens, had with the government, and again, growing organically in tandem with the political representation and political accountability, by the way, was that the law was completely impartial. The judges were impartial and apolitical. Now, did it work 100%? 100%? Well, of course not. Some judges were political hacks and goons, but the majority of them would judge on the merits of the case. Now, political cases where the state was directly concerned, say, could be, I don't know, what kind of national security, for example, then those were politically tainted. But the number of cases going to the courts that had a political angle or some sort of buy-in by the political class was quite minimal. Not that they didn't exist, they did, but it's quite minimal. Most of the cases were cases that were judged on the merits of the case and guilt or innocence declared, including things like murder and robbery and arson and damage to property and so on and so forth. So there were very few cases that had a political angle. But since ideology has crept into this, and particularly since the globalists have taken over so many of our institutions, ideology is now in every case. There are so few cases that are not ideologically tainted, and thus they are now politically tainted, and thus we see the political class now being drawn into almost every legal case that's happening, because there's always a marginalized group somehow, directly or indirectly involved, which then draws the ideology, which draws the political class into the case, which means every fucking legal case is now politicized and nothing can be decided on the merits of the case. And we can see that in how this hate group legislation, again, all over the Western world, is being framed, that they just reverse and if you're a straight white man, you're fucked. Burden of proof is reversed. You're not entitled to due legal process, and you can be randomly accused of being a member of a hate group or having said something hateful, or something that may be or could be or might be interpreted as hateful. Now, on top of that, they've added one more layer here, which should scare the bejabbers out of every citizen in the world, in the West in particular, given that we once had a common law legal system of jurisprudence. And that is now that if someone, say, they haven't committed an act of hate, again, whatever that is, they're not guilty of it, or there's no accusation on the table, or no arrest warrant or something like that, but they now, the wording has been changed to declaring that someone who's completely innocent has done nothing. Somebody might commit an act of hate. I mean, just let that sink in, if you will. Might commit an act of hate. So a totally innocent person, no police record, someone who's minding their own business, can come up with something as simple as, well, I think the mass migration is too high. I think it should be reduced. You hateful fucking swastika waving fucking Nazi, you fucking Hitler. That's a hate. You might commit an act of hate. So this would apply to, say, you want to, I don't know, get a tourist visa to visit, I don't know, wherever, Australia. You're coming from America, you want to visit Australia, then it can be just arbitrarily declared that you might commit some vague, unknown, unspecified, undefined act of hate. That's it. You can't commit. Or if you're in the country, you could be arrested for that. Now, I'm sure that they'll, the more prominent actions in this area would attract more attention than the lower. But if they're looking for examples, they want to scare and intimidate the populace, then rando arrests are a great way to do it. the knock on the door at midnight and perp walked all this sort of stuff. It's to intimidate. Now, when you look at sort of the structure of the and especially the discussion papers around it, is coming back to the shootings at Bondi Beach in Australia, where quite a number of people, Jewish people, were shot by Islamic activists. The issue would be, you would think, the issue would be, well, anyone that preaches hate, which could be in a mosque, which could be, anywhere at any time, particularly where it's related directly or indirectly to religious zealotry, then that would be, one would suspect, that would be a focus. But in all the discussion, they're very keen to move it away from that. And is the real problem Islamic religious zealotry? No, it's all those straight white Christian male Nazis. They're Nazis. It's the Nazis that we have to watch out for, which of course is utterly and totally absurd. But given their maniacal desire to show that the real problem is Nazis, we can imagine all sorts of false flags, or again, someone spits on the side of, you fucking Hitler, and get dragged off. And given that the person is not entitled to due legal process and can be, the state can go after them because what they might do, just imagine this, what they might do, then you get to, if you're a non-protected group, then you're straight white male. Now, if they drag the Islamic zealot into court, then you say, well, you guys are just all Islamic phobic. I'm a protected species. I'm a victim here. I'm a social victim. You're just trying to oppress me, you damn fascists. And that's almost like equivalent to get out of jail free card. But if you're straight white Christian male, you are fucked. And until legislation comes in saying, to treat white people not as a protected class per se, but if you call them a Nazi, you call them a fascist, you call them Hitler, you call them swastika wavers, you call them a hateful or something, then that is a hate crime in itself. But until that happens, we're going to get to a situation where it'll be quite acceptable to just random murder white people in the street, and you'll be considered socially virtuous for doing it. Difficult times and interesting times we live in. You're Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.